63% of workers say they wouldn't be able to cover a $500 emergency expense. That means if their car breaks down or a medical bill pops up, they have no choice but to swipe a credit card or take out a high-interest loan. The reality? Most Americans don't even have $1,000 in savings, leaving them one unexpected bill away from financial disaster. Right now, U.S. credit card debt has soared past $1 trillion, breaking records as more people rely on borrowed money just to cover basic expenses. But here's the real problem. Our poverty measurement system is still using outdated standards from the 1960s, failing to reflect today's cost of living. It's not just flawed, it's keeping millions of Americans trapped in a cycle of debt and hardship with no way out. If you want to stay ahead of what's really happening in the economy, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Economy Explorer so you don't miss our deep dives into issues that actually impact your financial future. Why more Americans are being pushed into poverty. Poverty in America isn't just about earning less. It's about living in a system that keeps people struggling, no matter how hard they work. It's a daily battle that affects everything: mental health, physical health, job opportunities, and long-term stability. Millions of Americans wake up every day wondering how they'll pay rent, put food on the table, or cover a medical bill. The stress of financial insecurity weighs people down, leads to higher rates of anxiety and depression, and forces families to make impossible choices. Right now, 37.9 million Americans are living in poverty, 11.6% of the population, despite the U.S. having the largest GDP in the world. It's a contradiction that raises a troubling question. How can a country so rich still have so many people struggling just to survive? For years, it looked like things were slowly improving. From 2013 to 2019, poverty rates steadily declined, dropping from 48.8 million to 34 million, as job markets recovered and wages slightly increased. But then, the pandemic erased an entire decade of progress overnight. Businesses shut down, unemployment spiked to record levels, and millions were suddenly left without steady paychecks. The hardest hit were those already at the bottom: low-income families, hourly workers, and communities of color. For many, the shutdown wasn't just a temporary setback, it was a permanent loss of stability. Even after lockdowns lifted, many jobs never came back, leaving workers stuck in an endless cycle of unstable work, mounting debt, and financial uncertainty. But here's the shocking reality. Poverty isn't just expensive for those living in it. It's also costing the entire U.S. economy. The government spends $665 billion a year, 11% of the federal budget, on economic security programs like food assistance and housing aid. But the real cost of poverty goes far beyond welfare spending. Child poverty alone costs the U.S. over $1 trillion annually when you factor in lost worker productivity, increased healthcare costs, and rising crime rates. The longer someone stays in poverty, the more resources it takes to support them, creating a financial burden that drags down not just individuals, but the entire economy. And here's the problem. More and more Americans are being pushed into poverty every year. The cost of living is rising faster than wages, debt levels are at record highs, and essential services like healthcare, housing, and education are becoming more unaffordable for the average worker. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed, keeping the rich richer and the poor struggling just to survive. So the question isn't just why so many people are struggling, it's whether the country is even willing to fix it. Why is income inequality getting worse? The gap between the rich and the poor in America has never been wider. The top 10% of earners take home over 13 times what the bottom 10% make, and since the pandemic, that gap has only gotten worse. While wealthier households invested, saved, and took advantage of rising stock and home prices, those at the bottom were left behind, facing layoffs, evictions, and skyrocketing costs just to survive. The economic downturn didn't just expose inequality, it widened it, making it even harder for lower-income Americans to escape financial hardship. Yet, despite the rising cost of housing, healthcare, and everyday necessities, the federal minimum wage is still frozen at $7.25 per hour, the same rate since 2009. Meanwhile, wages at the top have skyrocketed. According to MIT, a family of 4 needs at least $24.16 per hour just to cover basic living expenses. That means a single parent earning minimum wage would have to work 3 full-time jobs just to survive. But even then, inflation keeps chipping away at every dollar, making it impossible to get ahead. And here's the reality. Poverty doesn't hit everyone the same way. More than half of the 140 million Americans classified as low income or near poverty are people of color. Racial wage gaps, hiring discrimination, and systemic barriers keep many locked into financial struggles, no matter how hard they work. For marginalized communities, the dream of economic mobility isn't just difficult. It's nearly impossible in a system that favors the wealthy and punishes the working class. Are government safety nets failing? The U.S. also lacks strong social safety nets compared to other wealthy nations. In many European countries, families receive monthly child allowances and guaranteed health care. In the U.S., assistance is minimal, often making it harder for low-income families to get ahead. There's also the issue of benefit cliffs. If someone qualifies for Medicaid, food stamps, or housing assistance, even a small increase in income can make them ineligible for those programs. That means taking a slightly better job could actually leave someone worse off, discouraging upward mobility. The way poverty is measured in the U.S. is deeply flawed. The official poverty line is based on a formula from the 1960s that simply multiplies the cost of food by 3. It doesn't account for taxes, modern living costs, or regional price differences. In response to these flaws, the Supplemental Poverty Measure, SPM, was introduced in 2011, taking into account government assistance and cost of living differences. It provides a more accurate picture of poverty, but even this measure has its limitations. Critics argue that poverty in the U.S. is overstated because traditional poverty measures don't include government assistance like food stamps or housing subsidies. The Census Bureau calculates poverty based on pre-tax income, which doesn't fully reflect a household's financial situation. Still, there's no denying that economic hardship is widespread. And without an accurate way to measure poverty, policymakers are making decisions without a clear understanding of the problem. Can government policy actually solve poverty? If COVID proved anything, it's that government intervention can make a huge difference. During the pandemic, federal stimulus programs and expanded welfare benefits lifted 45.4 million Americans out of poverty. But once those programs ended, poverty rates shot back up. Policy changes could significantly reduce poverty in the U.S., raising the federal minimum wage to at least $15 an hour, expanding the child tax credit, and guaranteeing access to affordable health care are all potential solutions. Some experts even advocate for a universal basic income, guaranteeing a set monthly income to every citizen. The real problem isn't that people aren't working hard enough, it's that there aren't enough opportunities. The American economic system is like a game of musical chairs with more players than available seats. No matter how hard someone works, some people will always be left out. And it's not just low-income Americans who are struggling. More than half of Americans earning over $100,000 a year live paycheck to paycheck. This is partly due to lifestyle creep. Spending increases as earnings rise. The cost of living has skyrocketed, forcing many to rely on credit cards. 63% of workers say they wouldn't be able to handle a $500 emergency expense. In many cases, financial struggles aren't about poor money management. It's about wages that aren't keeping up with inflation. Americans now carry more credit card debt than ever before. With interest rates averaging over 22%, balances quickly spiral out of control. The average credit card balance is now over $6,000, making it harder for families to escape debt cycles. Another factor pushing Americans further into debt is the rising cost of essentials. Housing, healthcare, and education costs have all surged. The resumption of student loan repayments in 2023 only added to the financial strain. Despite these challenges, consumer spending remains strong. The holiday shopping season saw record spending, even as credit card delinquencies rose. But as more Americans struggle to keep up with debt payments, many are wondering how long this spending boom can last. Is there a way out? The first step to solving poverty isn't just talking about it. It's understanding the full scale of the problem. Right now, policymakers are making decisions with outdated data, using poverty measurements that don't reflect modern realities. If we don't even have an accurate picture of who is struggling and why, how can we create real solutions? The truth is, we can't. And without bold action, more and more Americans will continue to fall through the cracks, trapped in a system designed to keep them behind. But here's the thing. This crisis isn't inevitable. History has shown that the right policies can lift millions out of poverty. It happened before, and it can happen again. The question is, do we have the will to fix it? Because the cost of doing nothing is far greater than the cost of change. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Economy Explorer. And if you want to dive deeper into how the economy is shaping your future, check out one of the videos on your screen right now. Thanks for being a part of our channel. We'll see you in the next one.